As they were about to leave with the evidence, they were confronted by the head of the facility, a man named Victor Kane, who had been one of the original architects of Project Echo. Kane was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. He tried to convince them that what they were doing was pointless, that the project was too powerful to be stopped. But the Sarahs stood their ground, refusing to back down. In a tense and emotional confrontation, they confronted Kane with the evidence they had gathered, exposing the horrors of the project and demanding that it be shut down. But Kane wasn't willing to go quietly. He revealed one final shocking twist. The Sarahs weren't just clones. They were part of a new phase of the project, designed to be sleeper agents who could be activated to carry out missions for the organization. Their entire lives, their memories, even their personalities, had been carefully constructed to serve a purpose they had never known. The revelation was devastating, but it also gave them the strength to fight back. They realized that they weren't just fighting for the truth, they were fighting for their own autonomy, for the right to live their lives on their own terms. In a dramatic and heart-pounding finale, they managed to escape the facility with the evidence, narrowly avoiding capture and bringing the truth to light. The exposure of Project Echo sent shockwaves around the world, leading to investigations, arrests, and the eventual dismantling of the organization. The Sarahs became symbols of resilience and courage, inspiring others to stand up against injustice and fight for the truth. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath, the Sarahs had to come to terms with who they were and what they had been through. They realized that their identities weren't defined by their origins or the experiments that had created them. They were defined by their choices, their actions, and the lives they had built for themselves. They chose to embrace their uniqueness, to celebrate the bonds they had formed, and to live their lives with purpose and meaning. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they had the power to shape their own destinies, no matter where they had come from. The story of the two Sarahs is a reminder that the truth can be painful, but it's also liberating. It's a story about identity, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. And it's a story that leaves us with a question: what would you do if you discovered that your life wasn't what you thought it was? How far would you go to uncover the truth? Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes it's the only thing that can set us free. So, as you go about your day, remember the two Sarahs, and remember that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered. And when you find it, don't be afraid to face it, because it just might change your life forever. It's mine. It's everyone's. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make sense of the chaos. And sometimes, the only way to do that is to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Now, let's get back to Daniel. He's standing in that hospital room, holding his twins, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. But as he looks down at their tiny faces, something nags at him, something he can't quite put his finger on. And then it happens. A nurse walks in, her face pale, her hands trembling. She hands him a piece of paper, and as he reads it, his heart stops. Because what's written on that paper changes everything. It's a name he doesn't recognize, a name that shouldn't be there. And in that moment, Daniel realizes the life he thought he had is a lie. But here's the question: what will he do about it? And that's where we'll leave it for now. Because this is just the beginning of a story that will take you to the darkest corners of the human heart and back again. A story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and the secrets we keep. So, what do you say? Are you ready to uncover the truth? Are you ready to find out what happens next? Then stay tuned, because this is one story you won't want to miss. Daniel stood frozen in the hospital room, the piece of paper clutched tightly in his hand. The name on it, Liam Carter, meant nothing to him, but the way the nurse had looked at him, the way she had hesitated before handing it over, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a mix-up. This was something far bigger, far darker than he could have ever imagined. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who was Liam Carter? And why was his name on his twins' birth certificate? He glanced over at Emily, who was sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, her face serene, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. For a moment, he considered waking her, demanding answers right then and there. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her face, or the way she looked so fragile, so vulnerable lying there. Or maybe it was the fear of what he might discover if he started asking questions. So, he stayed silent, tucking the paper into his pocket, and decided to wait. But waiting, as he would soon find out, was the worst thing he could have done. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to push the incident out of his mind. He told himself it was nothing, a clerical error, a misunderstanding, anything but what his gut was telling him it was. But the name Liam Carter kept creeping back into his thoughts, like a shadow he couldn't shake. He found himself staring at the twins, searching their tiny faces for answers. Did they look like him? Did they have his eyes, his nose, his smile? Or was there something else there, something he couldn't quite place? The more he looked, the more uncertain he became. And then there was Emily. She seemed different, somehow distant, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. At first, he chalked it up to the exhaustion of new motherhood. But as the days went by, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming she needed to run errands or take a nap. But Daniel couldn't shake the suspicion that she was hiding something. And then there were the phone calls, the ones she would take in another room, her voice hushed, her tone urgent. Every time he asked who she was talking to, she would brush him off with a vague answer. Just a friend, she would say, or it's nothing. Don't worry about it. But Daniel was worried. In fact, he was starting to feel like he was losing his mind. It wasn't just Emily's behavior that was eating away at him. It was the little things, the way she would avoid his gaze when he brought up the twins, the way she would flinch whenever he mentioned the hospital. And then there were the nightmares. Every night, Daniel would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, his mind filled with images he couldn't explain. Dreams of faceless men, of empty cribs, of Emily walking away from him, her figure fading into the distance. He tried to tell himself it was just stress, just his mind playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And then one night, it all came to a head. Daniel was sitting in the living room, the twins asleep in their bassinet beside him, when he heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Who could be visiting at this hour? He crept to the window, his heart racing, and peered outside. There, parked in the driveway, was a black SUV, its engine still running. A man stepped out, his face obscured by the shadows, and walked toward the house. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. I think you'll find this enlightening. Daniel took the folder with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened it, his eyes scanning the documents inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. DNA tests, medical records, photos of Emily and Liam together, looking cozy, intimate, like they were more than just friends. And then, at the bottom of the pile, a birth certificate, one that listed Liam Carter as the father of the twins. Daniel felt like he was going to be sick. His hands shook as he dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the floor. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with hurt, with betrayal, with a pain so deep it felt like it would never heal. How could you? He whispered, his voice breaking. How could you do this to me? Emily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears, looking like a woman who had lost everything. And in that moment, Daniel realized she had. She had lost his trust, his love, his respect. And she had lost him. But as he stood there, his heart breaking, his world crumbling around him, he couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end? Or was there more to the story, more secrets, more lies, more betrayals that he had yet to uncover? And if there were, did he even want to know? Because one thing was certain, once the truth came out, there would be no going back. And Daniel wasn't sure he was ready for what that meant. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, the weight of Liam's revelation crushing him like a tidal wave. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the walls were closing in on him. He looked at Emily, her tear-streaked face, a mask of guilt and desperation, and then at Liam, whose smug expression made Daniel's blood boil. The twins, still asleep in their bassinet, seemed oblivious to the chaos unfolding around them, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Daniel's mind. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake Emily until she told him the truth. But before he could do any of that, Liam took a step closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "You didn't really think it was all rainbows and butterflies, did you?" he sneered. "Life's not a fairy tale, Daniel. And Emily? Well, let's just say she's not the woman you thought she was." Emily flinched at Liam's words, her hands trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself. "Liam, stop," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've made your point. Just leave us alone." But Liam wasn't done. He turned to Daniel, his eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. "You want to know the real kicker?" he said, his tone almost playful. "Emily didn't just lie to you about the twins. She lied to you about everything. Your marriage? A sham. Your life together? A carefully constructed lie. And you? You're just a pawn in her little game." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His mind raced, trying to make sense of Liam's words, but the pieces didn't fit. How could everything he thought he knew about Emily, about their life together, be a lie? He turned to her, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Emily, what is he talking about? What game? What are you hiding?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Liam cut her off. "Oh, let me save you the trouble," he said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through it. He held it up to Daniel, the screen displaying a series of text messages between Emily and someone named Jay. The messages were cryptic, filled with coded language and references to the plan and the payoff. Daniel's stomach churned as he read them, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Who's Jay?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Emily looked away, her silence speaking volumes. Liam smirked. "Jay is just one piece of the puzzle," he said. "But don't worry, Daniel. You'll meet him soon enough. In fact, I think you'll find him very interesting." Before Daniel could press further, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the tension. Liam's smirk widened, and he glanced toward the door. "Ah, right on time," he said, his tone almost gleeful. Daniel's heart pounded as he turned to look out the window. A sleek black sedan had parked behind Liam's SUV, and a man in a tailored suit was stepping out. He moved with an air of authority, his sharp features and piercing eyes, giving him an almost predatory presence. Daniel's stomach dropped as the man approached the house, his footsteps echoing on the porch. "Who is that?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam chuckled. "That," he said, "is Jay. And trust me, Daniel, you're going to want to hear what he has to say." The doorbell rang, the sound sharp and insistent, like a gunshot in the silence. Daniel hesitated, his mind racing. Should he answer it? Should he confront this man, this stranger, who seemed to hold the key to all the lies and secrets that had shattered his life? Before he could decide, Emily stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Daniel, don't," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're getting into. Just let me handle this." But Daniel was done being in the dark. He was done being manipulated, being lied to. He pushed past her and opened the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The man standing on the porch was even more intimidating up close. His eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a moment, Daniel felt like he was staring into the abyss. "Daniel," the man said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The man smiled a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "My name is Jonathan," he said, "but you can call me Jay. And I think it's time we had a little chat about your wife and the role you've been playing in all of this." Daniel's mind was spinning, his thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, anger, and confusion. He looked back at Emily, who was standing in the corner, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Emily, what is going on?" he demanded, his voice breaking. But before she could respond, Jay stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Let's cut to the chase, shall we?" he said, his tone businesslike. "Emily here has been working for me for quite some time. And you, Daniel, have been an unwitting participant in a very lucrative operation." Daniel's stomach churned. "What operation?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jay smiled, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "Let's just say it involves a lot of money, a lot of secrets, and a lot of people who would do anything to keep those secrets buried." Daniel felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. He looked at Emily, his heart breaking, his mind screaming with questions. How could she do this? How could she involve him in something so dangerous, so deceitful, without him even knowing? And the twins, were they even real, or were they just another part of the lie? Before he could ask, Jay pulled out a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Daniel. "Here," he said. "I think you'll find this enlightening." Daniel took the folder with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened it, his eyes scanning the documents inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Financial records, surveillance photos, a detailed timeline of Emily's movements over the past year. And at the bottom of the pile, a contract one that listed Emily as a key player in a high-stakes scheme involving millions of dollars and some very dangerous people. Daniel's hands shook as he dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the floor. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with hurt, with betrayal, with a pain so deep it felt like it would never heal. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears, looking like a woman who had lost everything. And in that moment, Daniel realized she had lost his trust, his love, his respect. And she had lost him. But as he stood there, his heart breaking, his world crumbling around him, he couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end? Or was there more to the story, more secrets, more lies, more betrayals that he had yet to uncover? And if there were, did he even want to know? Because one thing was certain, once the truth came out, there would be no going back. And Daniel wasn't sure he was ready for what that meant. But as he looked at Jay, at Liam, at Emily, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them control him anymore. He was going to find out the truth, no matter what it cost him. Daniel stood in the center of the room, the weight of the revelations pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. The documents scattered on the floor were more than just paper. They were the shattered pieces of his life, each one a reminder of how deeply he had been betrayed. His eyes darted between Emily, Liam, and Jay, each of them representing a different layer of the deception that had consumed his world. But amidst the chaos, a fire began to burn within him, a determination to uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. He took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Start talking," he said, his gaze locking onto Jay. "I want to know everything. No more lies. No more secrets. Just the truth." Jay's smile was cold, almost predatory, as he leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed. "Very well," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But I warn you, Daniel, the truth isn't always what you want to hear." He began to unravel the story, each word like a dagger to Daniel's heart. Emily, it turned out, had been working for Jay for years, long before she ever met Daniel. Her role? To infiltrate the lives of wealthy, unsuspecting men, gain their trust, and extract sensitive information that Jay could use for his own gain. Daniel had been just another mark, a means to an end. The marriage, the pregnancy, even the twins, it had all been part of an elaborate scheme to secure Daniel's fortune and connections. But somewhere along the way, things had gone off script. Emily had developed genuine feelings for Daniel, and the twins conceived during a moment of weakness with Liam had complicated everything. Jay, however, wasn't one to let sentimentality get in the way of business. He had been pulling the strings all along, using Liam to keep Emily in line and ensure the plan stayed on track. Daniel's mind reeled as he processed Jay's words. The life he thought he had built, the love, the family, the future, had all been a carefully constructed illusion. He turned to Emily, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Is any of it real?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for some shred of truth. Emily's tears flowed freely now, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you. But by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was in too deep." Her words were like a knife to Daniel's chest, but they also ignited something within him, a resolve to take back control of his life, no matter the cost. Before Daniel could respond, Liam stepped forward, his usual smugness replaced by a rare flicker of unease. "Look, Daniel," he said, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "I know this is messed up, but it's not too late to walk away. Jay's got people everywhere. If you try to fight him, you'll lose. Just take the twins and go. Start over. Forget any of this ever happened." But Daniel wasn't about to back down. He had been played for a fool, but he wasn't going to let them win. He turned to Jay, his voice steady and filled with a quiet determination. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" he said. "But you made one mistake. You underestimated me." Jay raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by Daniel's defiance. "Oh," he said, his tone mocking. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up for Jay to see. On the screen was a live recording of their conversation, the red dot blinking ominously in the corner. Jay's smirk faltered for the first time, his eyes narrowing as he realized what Daniel had done. "You're bluffing," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Daniel shook his head. "I'm not," he said. "This is going out live to the authorities. And if anything happens to me, or to the twins, this recording will be the least of your problems." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost palpable. Jay's expression darkened, his calm facade cracking under the weight of Daniel's unexpected move. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. But Daniel stood his ground, his eyes locked onto Jay's. "No," he said. "You made the mistake. You thought you could control me, manipulate me, destroy my life without consequences. But you were wrong." Before Jay could respond, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jay's face twisted with rage, and he turned to Liam, barking orders to get them out of there. But it was too late. Within minutes, the house was surrounded by police, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they moved in to apprehend Jay and Liam. As the chaos unfolded around him, Daniel turned to Emily, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." Daniel looked at her, his mind racing with everything they had been through, the love, the lies, the pain. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said, his voice breaking. "But for the sake of the twins, I'll try." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face as the police led her away. In the days that followed, the full extent of Jay's operation came to light. His network of deceit and manipulation was dismantled, and those involved were brought to justice. Daniel, though scarred by the ordeal, found solace in the twins, the one bright spot in the midst of the darkness. They were a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there was still hope, still love, still a future worth fighting for. As he held them in his arms, their tiny hands gripping his fingers, he made a silent promise to protect them, to give them the life they deserved, a life built on truth, not lies. But just when Daniel thought the nightmare was over, an unexpected twist emerged. As he sorted through Emily's belongings, he found a letter addressed to him, written in her handwriting. In it, she revealed one final secret, one that would change everything. The twins, she confessed, were not Liam's after all. They were Daniel's. The DNA test had been falsified, part of Jay's plan to manipulate Daniel into walking away. Emily had gone along with it, fearing what Jay might do if she refused. But in the end, she couldn't bear to let Daniel believe the lie. "They're yours," she wrote. "They've always been yours. And no matter what happens, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Daniel sat there, the letter in his hands, his mind reeling from the revelation. The twins were his. They had always been his. And in that moment, he realized that despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, there was still a chance for redemption, for healing, for a new beginning. He looked down at the twins, their innocent faces, a reminder of the love that had brought them into the world, a love that, despite everything, had never truly died. And as he held them close, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would do whatever it took to protect them, to give them the life they deserved. Because in the end, love, real love, was worth fighting for. And Daniel was ready to fight.